The Grandview restaurant sat on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Chicago, and on a clear Thursday evening in October, it glittered like a crown above the city. Every table was booked 6 weeks in advance. The menu had no prices because, according to the owner, if you needed to ask, you probably should not be there. The staff wore pressed white shirts and moved like well-rehearsed dancers between the polished tables, invisible when they needed to be and present when they were not. Emma Calloway had been working the evening shift at the Grandview for 8 months, and she still had not gotten used to the shoes. They were black, closed-toe, and perfectly professional. And by the end of a 6-hour shift, they felt like concrete blocks wrapped in leather. She told herself it was temporary. Everything about Chicago felt temporary when you came from Milbrook, Ohio, a town with 1 gas station, a public library that closed on Wednesdays, and more cornfields than people. She had come to Chicago with a scholarship acceptance to DePaul University that she later had to defer because her mother's medical bills had decided to become a full-time crisis. The scholarship was still waiting. Emma was still waiting too. In the meantime, there were tables to clear, and wine glasses to fill, and customers who looked through you like you were made of air. She was balancing 3 entrees on her left arm when the private dining room at the end of the hall opened its doors for the evening's most important reservation, Table 12. She had been briefed by her manager, Carl, who had the nervous energy of a man who had consumed 7 espressos before noon. Richard Holt, Carl had whispered, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. Holt Industries. He just acquired the Collister Group last week for $2 billion. He does not like to be rushed. He does not like unnecessary conversation, and he definitely does not like cold food. Emma had nodded and done what she always did. She showed up, she paid attention, and she tried not to think about her feet. The party of 4 arrived at 7 sharp. Richard Holt walked in like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be uncertain about anything. He was tall with broad shoulders and dark hair cut close and neat, and he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 2 months. His jaw was set firm, and his eyes, a shade of gray that reminded Emma of the sky before a serious storm, moved across the room in one practiced sweep before settling on nothing in particular. The 3 people with him were talking over each other, something about quarterly projections and market positioning, and Richard Holt was listening to all of it with the expression of a man who had already calculated every outcome before the meeting had begun. Emma served them with the quiet precision she had learned in those 8 months. She refilled glasses before they were empty. She remembered who had ordered what without writing it down. She kept her responses short and polite when the man to Richard's left, red-faced and too loud, asked her 3 times whether the salmon was wild caught. It was, she told him. He asked again. She told him again. She kept smiling. The evening shifted when dessert arrived. One of the guests, a woman in an ivory blazer, reached across the table and knocked her wineglass directly into the centerpiece arrangement. Red wine spread across the white linen in a wide, dark bloom. The woman gasped. The other men pushed back from the table. Richard Holt sat perfectly still, watching the mess with no visible reaction whatsoever. Emma was there in seconds with fresh linen napkins, calm and efficient, replacing the tablecloth corner and moving the damaged centerpiece without making it into a performance. She looked up once while she worked and found Richard Holt watching her, not the spilled wine, not his colleagues. Her, she held his gaze for exactly 1 second before returning to her task. "You did not panic," he said. After the others had excused themselves to make phone calls and use the restroom and do the various things people do when they need to escape from an awkward silence, Emma paused, a damp cloth in her hand. "It is wine," she said simply. "It is not a reason to panic." Something shifted in his expression. It was slight, the way a door opens just a crack before someone decides whether to open it all the way. Most people in service positions perform a kind of apology when something goes wrong, even when it is not their fault. "You did not do that. I did not spill it," Emma said, then caught herself. "I apologize." That was blunt. "No," he said, and the firmness in his voice had softened by the smallest possible degree. It was accurate. When the party finished and the bill was settled, and the other 3 guests gathered their things to leave, Richard Holt remained seated. He told his colleagues he would catch up with them downstairs. Carl materialized at Emma's elbow and made frantic, meaningful eye contact, which Emma interpreted as a signal to be more formal and attentive. She brought fresh water without being asked. He looked at the glass for a moment. "You enjoy this work?" he asked. It was not quite a question, more like something he was thinking out loud. Emma considered lying. The polished service industry version of everything is wonderful. Instead, she said, "I enjoy doing things well. This is something I can do well right now." "Right now," he repeated. "I deferred university," she said, then wondered why she had offered that. "That is more than you asked." "It is not," he said. He looked at her with that storm-gray gaze. "Tell me something honest. Not about the restaurant. About anything." It was an odd request from a man she had served for 2 hours. It was the kind of question that had no safe professional answer. Emma set down the water pitcher and said, "Honest about what?" "About what a person like you does when they are not here." "A person like me," she said carefully. "Capable, underpaid, smarter than the room." Emma felt heat rise along the back of her neck. Not embarrassment exactly, more like the feeling of being seen without having agreed to it. "I go home," she said. "I read. I call my mother. I look at my university acceptance letter sometimes to remember it is still there." He was quiet. The restaurant had grown still around them. The other tables cleared, the kitchen sounds winding down. Carl had disappeared, probably collapsed somewhere from overstimulation. "What would you study?" Richard asked. "Business and economics," Emma said. "My mother runs a small home care service in Ohio. It almost failed twice because she does not understand contracts." "I want to understand contracts." Richard Holt looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men in expensive suits sometimes looked at women who brought them their food, with a kind of casual ownership. He looked at her the way someone looks at a painting they did not expect to find in a room where they expected nothing remarkable. "You should not be deferring," he said finally. "I know that," Emma said. "I am handling it." Later, she would not be entirely sure how the next part happened. He had asked to see the view from the terrace attached to the private dining room, the one that overlooked the lake. She had taken him out there because it was technically her section, and Carl was nowhere to be found. The October air was cold and sharp, and the city spread below them in streaks of orange and white light. Richard Holt stood at the railing without his jacket, which he had draped over the back of a chair inside. And Emma stood beside him because she did not know where else to stand. He told her about the Collister acquisition. Not the numbers, but the reason. A company he had admired from a distance for a decade. He talked about it the way a person talks when they finally say something true after a long evening of saying everything else. Emma listened the way she always listened, completely, when he turned toward her. The distance between them had become something different than it had been a moment before. She knew it. We knew it. She did not look away. What happened between Emma Calloway and Richard Holt on the terrace of the Grandview restaurant on that cold Thursday evening in October was not planned by either of them. It was quiet and careful and honest, the way people behave when they are both, in different ways, lonely. And when it was over, and the city still blazed below them, and the wind moved through the bare trees on the roof garden, Emma stood in the October dark and felt the weight of something she could not yet name. Richard Holt put his jacket back on. He handed her a business card. He said nothing dramatic. He said, "I hope you get back to that letter." Emma held the card in her cold hand and watched him leave. She had no idea that by morning the quiet thing that had happened on that terrace would begin to pull both their lives in a direction neither of them had ever planned for. 3 weeks passed before Emma heard from Richard Holt. In those 3 weeks, she convinced herself twice that she would not hear from him at all. The business card sat in the small dish on her kitchen counter, beside her keys and a chapstick and a hair tie. And she looked at it every morning the way you look at something you were trying to decide whether to throw away. She did not throw it away. She worked her shifts at the Grandview. She called her mother on Sunday evenings and listened to Gloria. Calloway described the small victories and frustrations of running a 4-person home care operation out of a converted garage in Milbrook. Her mother had the voice of someone who had decided a long time ago that optimism was a practical choice rather than a personality trait. The Henderson account renewed, Gloria said one Sunday, and Emma could hear her smiling. And Tommy fixed the furnace himself. Watched a video on the internet and just fixed it. Emma smiled at the wall of her apartment. Her brother Tommy, 22, and perpetually enthusiastic about everything, had that effect on situations. He made broken things workable through sheer refusal to accept that broken was permanent. When Richard's number appeared on her phone, Emma was sitting at her small kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal and a contract. Law textbook she had borrowed from the public library. She let it ring twice before answering. "I have a charity gala on Friday," he said, without preamble. "The Holt Foundation. Children's literacy programs. I would like you to come." Emma looked at her oatmeal. "As what?" she said. A brief pause. "As my guest, Mr. Holt. Richard." "Richard," she said, trying the word. It felt strange in her mouth, too familiar and not familiar enough at the same time. "I work Friday evenings." "I know. I called the Grandview and arranged for your shift to be covered." Carl was very accommodating. Emma set down her spoon. "You called my workplace, yes, without asking me first." Another pause, shorter this time. "That was presumptuous of me." "I was," Emma said. She waited. "I am sorry," he said. The words came out carefully, like someone reading from a map in a language they were still learning. Emma had the sense that apologies were not a frequent stop on Richard Holt's daily itinerary. "Tell me about the gala," she said. He told her. The Holt Foundation had been funding literacy programs in underserved communities for 11 years. The annual gala raised the majority of its operating budget. 400 guests. Black tie. The Meridian Grand Ballroom. Emma listened and thought about her closet, which contained exactly nothing appropriate for a black tie event at the Meridian Grand Ballroom. "I do not have anything to wear to something like that," she said. "Because there was no point in pretending otherwise." "I can arrange something." "I would rather arrange it myself," Emma said. She thought of her savings account, which was respectable in the way that something held together with discipline and sacrifice is respectable. Something reasonable, Emma. Her name and his voice had a particular quality she could not categorize. "Let me do this." "Not because you cannot, because I want to," she agreed, eventually. After making it clear that she was keeping a record of anything he spent on her behalf, because she had been raised by a woman who believed that generosity should be received with gratitude and repaid when possible. Richard said that was not necessary. Emma said it was for her. The dress that arrived Thursday morning was navy blue. Floor length, elegant, without being excessive. It fit as though someone had described her to a dressmaker with unusual precision, which, she realized, they probably had. There were matching shoes that were somehow comfortable in a way that should not have been possible given their heel height. Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time and thought about a girl in Milbrook who used to press her nose against the window of the one nice restaurant in town and imagine what it felt like to belong. Somewhere like that. She looked like she belonged somewhere like that. Richard sent a car. She rode to the Meridian Grand alone, watching Chicago pass outside the window. And when the car stopped and the door opened, she stepped out into a blaze of camera flashes and evening gowns and the low roar of 400. People who had dressed their best and come to be seen while also, in varying degrees of sincerity, doing something good. Richard was waiting at the entrance. He saw her, and something moved across his face, quick and unguarded, gone almost before it arrived. He offered his arm without speaking. "You look." He started. "Don't," Emma said, smiling a little. "I already know. Let's go in." The first hour went better than Emma had prepared herself for. Richard introduced her to a state senator who asked thoughtful questions about education funding. She met the director of the foundation, a compact woman named Helen who had spent 30 years in public school classrooms and spoke about children's literacy with the controlled passion of someone who could be furious and functional at the same time. Emma liked her immediately. She talked with Helen for 20 minutes about the public library system in rural Ohio and how it had shaped her own reading when Richard found them again. Helen looked at him and said, Where did you find this one? Keep her. Richard looked at Emma with that almost smile he carried like a closely held secret. The trouble arrived in the form of Sylvia Monroe at approximately 8-15. Sylvia was 35. Blonde and constructed with the kind of beauty that requires enormous effort and never looks like it does. She had been engaged to Richard for 14 months 2 years ago. A fact Emma had not known until Derek Walsh, Richard's best friend, mentioned it in passing while refilling his champagne glass. Derek was broad-shouldered and blunt in the way that people who grew up with money can sometimes afford to be. But he had looked at Emma over the rim of his glass with something approaching genuine assessment and said, "He talks about you, you know. He doesn't talk about people." Emma had not known what to do with that information, so she had filed it away. Sylvia approached their table with the practiced ease of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of entrance. She kissed Richard on both cheeks and then turned to Emma with a smile that had all the warmth of a marble floor. "You must be the waitress," Sylvia said. The table went quiet. Derek set down his glass. Emma looked at Sylvia with the same clear, steady expression she had used on the man who had asked her 4 times about the salmon. "I am Emma Calloway," she said. "And you must be someone Richard used to know." Sylvia's smile tightened at the corners. "Still very much someone Richard knows. We have a long history. It's one of those things, isn't it, Richard? Some connections just don't dissolve." She turned back to Emma with a brightness that was several degrees past genuine. "It must be so interesting for you seeing all this for the first time. Everything must feel so new and different from what you're used to." "Most good things do," Emma said pleasantly. Richard set down his drink. His voice when he spoke was the temperature of the October air on the terrace 3 weeks ago. "Sylvia, I think you've said enough. I'm only being friendly, Richard. It's a public event, then enjoy it," he said. At another table, Sylvia's smile did not change. She looked at Emma once more, a look that was meant to communicate something final and diminishing. And then she moved away through the crowd with the same practiced grace with which she had arrived. Emma watched her go, and then picked up her water glass and took a calm sip. "I'm sorry," Richard said. "She's insecure," Emma said. "Insecure people perform. It's not about me." Derek let out a low sound that was mostly admiration. "He definitely should keep you," he said. The rest of the evening settled into something easier. Emma found that she was not the outsider she had expected to feel like. She asked questions when she did not know something. She offered opinions when she had them. She noticed that people at events like this were often surprised when the person they were talking to was genuinely listening rather than waiting for their turn to speak. And they responded to it the way people always do when they encounter something they did not expect. When the cars arrived at the end of the night and the crowd spilled out into the cool autumn dark, Richard walked her to her car, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment while the city moved around them. "You handled yourself tonight," he said. "I handle things," Emma said. "It's what I do." He looked at her for a moment with that storm-gray gaze she'd been thinking about for 3 weeks. "I want you to meet someone," he said. "Someone important to me? Derek?" She guessed. "My mother." Emma felt the particular quality of that silence. "All right," she said slowly. "She is not easy. Most important things aren't," he nodded. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from her face with a careful, deliberate gesture that had nothing casual about it. "I'll drive to Ohio first," he said. "I want to meet your family." Emma stared at him. "You want to come to Milbrook?" "Ohio." "Yes. There is one gas station. I've been to worse places." Emma thought about her mother's house with its cheerful clutter and the smell of whatever Gloria was cooking and Tommy's basketball shoes permanently stationed at the front door. She thought about Richard Holt in a charcoal suit walking through that front door. She thought about how Gloria Calloway would look at him and see straight through everything expensive to whatever was underneath, because that was what her mother did with everyone. "Next Saturday," Emma said. "Don't wear the suit," he almost smiled. "Done." He came on a gray November Saturday in a dark green sweater and dark jeans, looking slightly less like a magazine cover and slightly more like a person. Emma met him at the door of her mother's house and watched his face as Gloria appeared behind her. wiping her hands on a dish towel and looking at him with the open, assessing warmth of someone who had raised children and cared for strangers and decided long ago that she could read most people in under a minute. "You're the one keeping my daughter in Chicago," Gloria said. "I'm trying," Richard said. Gloria looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood back from the door and said, "Come in and eat something. You look like you work too hard and don't eat enough." Tommy emerged from the hallway, basketball under one arm, and sized Richard up the way 22-year-olds size up people they are deciding whether to accept. "You know anything about basketball?" he asked. "Almost nothing," Richard said. Tommy considered this. Honest answer. "Okay, come on." Ate at the kitchen table. Gloria made pot roast and biscuits and asked Richard questions with the directness of someone who did not see the point of misdirection. She asked about his work, not in a way that was impressed by the scale of it, but in a way that was curious about what it required of him. She asked what he had wanted to be as a child. He said an architect. She said she could see that. She asked whether he had people around him who told him the truth or people who told him what he wanted to hear. He was quiet for a moment and said mostly the second kind. She nodded and passed him the biscuits, driving back through Milbrook in the early evening. Richard was quieter than usual. Emma let the silence sit for a while before she said, "She liked you." "How do you know?" "She gave you biscuits twice. She only does that for people she likes." He looked at the flat Ohio landscape, the fields that had gone pale gold in November, the water tower painted with the town's name in fading letters. "You grew up well," he said, and it did not sound like a polite observation. It sounded like something he had genuinely arrived at. Emma looked out the window at the town that had shaped her. "I grew up honestly," she said. "It's not the same thing, but it's close." When he left that evening, he held her face in both hands for a moment and looked at her with an expression that had run out of its usual careful management. Something open and undefended that she had not seen on him before. He did not say anything elaborate. He said, "I'm not going anywhere." Emma believed him. She did not know that 3 days later, Patricia Holt would make a phone call that would threaten to dismantle everything they had been building, quietly and deliberately. The way experienced people dismantle things when they do not want anyone to see the damage till it's done. Patricia Holt did not make scenes. That was not her style. Women of her particular background and generation had learned that the most effective damage was done quietly, through channels that left no fingerprints and created no witnesses. She operated the way water operates on stone, not dramatically, not all at once, but with patience and consistency until the stone simply was no longer what it had been. Emma learned about Patricia 3 days after Richard left Milbrook, when Gloria called on a Wednesday morning with a careful tone in her voice that Emma recognized immediately as the sound of her mother trying not to alarm her. "A woman called the house," Gloria said. "She said she was a family friend of Richard's. She asked questions about us." "About you?" "About our finances and whether Tommy was in any trouble at school and whether I had ever had any issues with my home care licensing." Emma sat very still at her kitchen table. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know who she was or why she was asking, and that she should direct any further questions directly to the people she was curious about." Gloria paused. She had a particular kind of voice, the kind that's used to people doing what it says. "Patricia Holt," Emma said. "I assumed." Emma called Richard. He answered on the second ring, and she told him plainly what had happened. The silence on his end was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of someone who had been expecting a particular thing and was now dealing with the fact that it had arrived. "I'll handle it," he said. Richard, Emma said carefully. "I am not asking you to fight a battle for me. I am telling you what happened because you should know. What happens next is between you and your mother." "You're not angry?" "I'm bothered," Emma said honestly. "Your mother is testing me through my family, which means she's decided I'm a threat rather than a person. That's her choice to make. But I want to be clear about something. I will not spend the next 10 years trying to earn approval from someone who has already decided the verdict." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I know." Patricia Holt lived in a townhouse in Lincoln Park that had been in the Holt family for 40 years. It was the kind of home that communicated permanence in every detail: the dark wood paneling, the oil portraits, the arrangement of furniture that suggested no one had questioned it in decades. Emma had not been invited there. She knew this meeting was coming nonetheless. It's the way you know certain weather's coming regardless of whether you want it. It arrived on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks later. Richard drove. He had told his mother he was bringing Emma, and Patricia had said, in the tone of someone rearranging a schedule to accommodate a minor inconvenience, that she would have dinner prepared. Emma wore a simple dark green dress and her own shoes, and no jewelry except the small gold earrings her mother had given her when she graduated high school. She had not borrowed anything or purchased anything to impress. She had decided on the drive over that she was going to walk into Patricia Holt's home as exactly herself, because any version of herself she constructed for the occasion would eventually have to be maintained. And she was too tired and too honest for that kind of sustained performance. Patricia opened the door herself. She was in her late 60s, slim and upright, with Richard's gray eyes and a composure that suggested she had been practicing it since childhood. She looked at Emma the way a person looks at a document they are about to review for errors. "Miss Calloway?" she said. "Mrs. Holt," Emma said. "Thank you for having me." The dining room was formal without being cold. A housekeeper brought food and courses, and Patricia presided over the table with the ease of someone who had hosted difficult dinners for decades and found them bracing rather than stressful. She asked Emma questions throughout the meal, not rudely, but with the consistent precision of someone conducting an evaluation they had designed in advance. She asked about Emma's educational background. Emma told her about the deferral and the reason for it, plainly, without apology. Patricia said that was unfortunate. Emma said it was temporary. She asked about Gloria's home care business and whether it was financially stable. Emma said it was growing, that her mother had built it from nothing with no outside investment, and that she was proud of her. She asked whether Emma had any plans beyond waitressing. Emma said she planned to return to university within the year to complete her business economics degree. She intended afterward to help her mother formalize and expand the care business and eventually run her own operation. Patricia listened to all of this with an expression that gave away very little. Richard sat across the table and said almost nothing, watching his mother and Emma with the focused attention of someone monitoring a situation that could move in any direction. It was after the main course, when the housekeeper had cleared the plates and brought coffee, that Patricia set down her cup and looked at Emma directly and said, "My son has rearranged his professional life in meaningful ways since meeting you. He has reduced his presence in Chicago, he has redirected resources, and he has, by several accounts, become less available to the obligations that built Holt Industries into what it is. I would like to know whether you asked him to do any of that." Emma said. "Did you encourage it?" "No." "Then what exactly is your role in these decisions?" Emma looked at Patricia steadily. "None," she said. "Richard makes his own choices. He is 38 years old, and he built a billion-dollar company. I think we can agree he is capable of deciding how to spend his time. He's also capable of being influenced by emotion in ways that do not serve him." "Everyone is," Emma said. "That's not a flaw. That's how people work." Patricia's expression shifted by a fraction. "You're not intimidated by me." "I respect you," Emma said. "That's different from being intimidated. You raised a serious, disciplined, genuinely good man. That doesn't happen by accident. But I think you're asking me the wrong questions." To pause. "What are the right questions?" Emma set down her own coffee cup. "You should be asking whether I make him happy, whether I am honest with him, whether I want things from him that he cannot sustainably give. Those are the questions that matter in the long run." "And your answers?" "Yes, yes, and no." Silence settled over the table. The housekeeper appeared briefly in the doorway and then retreated. Richard had gone very still. Patricia looked at Emma for a long moment. Then she looked at her son. Something passed between them. A conversation made entirely of things they had said to each other over decades and things they had never said at all. "She doesn't need your protection," Patricia said to Richard finally. It was not a criticism. It was closer to a concession. "I know," Richard said. Patricia picked up her coffee cup again. She said, "To no one in particular, the biscuits your mother makes." Richard described them. "I would like the recipe." Emma blinked. "My mother's biscuits. Richard says they're exceptional. I'd like to try making them." It was such a small, unexpected thing that Emma almost laughed. Instead, she said, "I'll ask her." "She'll be pleased," someone asked. The evening ended without resolution, which was its own kind of progress. Patricia walked them to the door and shook Emma's hand with a firm, dry grip and said that she hoped to see her again. It was not warmth exactly. It was the beginning of something that might, over time, become warmth. The way winter becomes spring, not through a single dramatic shift, but through a gradual accumulation of slightly less cold days. In the car, Richard exhaled slowly. "That was better than I expected." "She loves you," Emma said. "She's scared of losing influence over your life." "Those are understandable things." "You're remarkably generous to someone who investigated your family." "Practical," Emma said. "She's going to be in our lives for a long time. I would rather build something workable than win an argument." "Dat." He reached across and took her hand. He did not say anything. She looked out the window at the November streets of Chicago and thought about how much had changed in the 6 weeks since a man in a charcoal suit had watched her deal with a spilled glass of wine and asked her why she had not panicked. What happened in December arrived in pieces, the way the best things often do, without announcement. Richard called her on a Monday morning and asked her to meet him at his office. Not the Grandview, not a restaurant, his actual office in the Holt Industries building on Michigan Avenue. Emma had never been there. She rode the elevator to the 29th floor and was shown into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the lake. Gray and enormous in December, with ice forming at its edges. Richard was standing at the windows when she came in. He turned and looked at her with an expression she had seen once before. On the terrace of the Grandview, the one that had run out of its careful management. "Sit down," he said. "I want to tell you something."
She sat.
He remained standing, which she suspected was because he needed to move while he talked. "I have spent 15 years building things," he said. "Companies, portfolios, a reputation. I am good at building things. I understand what they require, and I am willing to give what they require. I am not good at the other parts. I was not taught the other parts. My father left when I was 11, and my mother managed everything. That followed with efficiency and very little warmth. And I learned from that and became someone who manages. Everything with efficiency and very little warmth stopped. Until October." Emma waited. "I want to register you for the spring semester at DePaul," he said. "Full tuition. Not as a loan. Not as something you repay. As something I am doing because I want to, and because it is the right thing, and because you should not be deferring your life for circumstances that are fixable." Emma opened her mouth. "Wait," he said. "There is more?" She closed her mouth. "I want to fund your mother's expansion, the home care operation. She has a real business that is being constrained by capital she doesn't have. I've looked at her numbers. With modest investment, she could triple her capacity within 2 years and employ 6 more people in Milbrook." He paused. "I ran the analysis last week because I needed something to do with my hands while I was thinking about how to say all this." Emma sat very still. Outside the windows, the lake moved under a pale December sky. And Richard said, "I would like you to move to Chicago. Not into my apartment, unless you want to. Into your own place. Near DePaul. Because you belong here, and because the scholarship you worked for should not be sitting in a drawer while you carry other people's problems." He stopped talking. The office was quiet. Emma looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. The way you look at something when you want to make sure you understand it correctly before you respond to it. "You analyzed my mother's business," she said. "Yes. You ran projections. Detailed ones." "Richard," Emma said slowly. "You could have just said you loved me." Something crossed his face, startled and unguarded and almost boyish. "I did say that," he said. "I said it in the language I know." Emma stood up from the chair. She crossed the office and stood in front of him, and she took his face in both hands the way he had taken hers outside the Meridian Grand. And she looked at him directly and said, "I love you. In plain English, I love you." He put his arms around her and held her, with the particular care of someone who has spent a long time holding things at a professional distance and is only now learning that some things are meant to be held differently. Say yes to DePaul, he said into her hair. Yes to DePaul, she said. Say yes to your mother's expansion. Yes to that too, on the condition that it's structured as a formal investment with returns. Gloria Calloway does not take charity. I expected that condition, he said. I already drafted the terms. Aima laughed against his shoulder. You drafted the terms.
After last Thursday.
Derek said it was the most romantic thing he had ever seen anyone do. He was being sarcastic. I told him he was wrong. He was wrong, Emma said. She enrolled at DePaul in January. The dormitory-style apartment Richard helped her find was 4 blocks from campus, small and bright and entirely hers. She painted the kitchen yellow because she wanted to, and she put her university acceptance letter in a frame and hung it above the desk where she studied. Every evening after the classes she had been waiting 2 years to take, Gloria Calloway signed the investment agreement in February. By spring she had hired 2 new care workers and was in conversations with the county about a contract that would more than double her client base. Tommy fixed a problem with the new scheduling software by watching 3 videos online, and then, characteristically, also fixed the printer and reorganized the filing system because he was already there. Richard drove to Milbrook on a Saturday in March, when the fields were just beginning to show the first uncertain green of the coming season. He and Tommy played an unconvincing game of 2-on-2 basketball in the driveway with the neighbor's kid from across the street. Gloria made biscuits and sent the recipe to Patricia Holt in a handwritten note that included a tip about butter temperature that she said made all the difference. Patricia sent back a thank you note on monogram stationery that Gloria put on the refrigerator. On a Sunday evening in April, Emma and Richard sat on the small balcony of her apartment with takeout containers between them and the Chicago skyline doing what it always did, blazing and enormous and indifferent in the middle distance. Emma had an exam in contract law the following morning. Richard had a board meeting. They were both tired in the comfortable way that people are tired when they have been doing things that matter. Are you happy? Richard asked. It was not a performance of the question. It was the real version. Emma thought about it honestly, the way she did everything. She thought about the girl in Milbrook who pressed her nose against restaurant windows. She thought about the October terrace and the cold air and the moment she had decided to answer an unexpected question with the truth. She thought about her mother's voice on Sunday evenings and Tommy and biscuits and a business card sitting in a dish beside her keys. Yes, she said. Are you? Richard looked at the city and then at her. He had the expression he had been wearing more frequently in recent months. The open, undefended one, the one that had stopped needing to be carefully managed. For the first time in a long time, he said, Yes. Emma reached over and took his hand. The city blazed. The spring air moved through the balcony. Somewhere below them, Chicago went on being Chicago, enormous and indifferent and full of people finding things they had not expected to find. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for taking Thed time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.